Hi everyone, welcome back to InSync. I'm your host Anmol Irfan, and today we'll be taking a deeper dive into the second part of our project, Echoes Unmuted, Navigating Technology Facilitated Gender Based Violence. A mouthful, I know, with our very first podcast for this topic. Echoes Unmuted is a project we've launched at Echoes Media in collaboration with WOW Pakistan ahead of their upcoming WOW Festival in January. As we kick off the second part of Echoes Unmuted, which focuses on the complexities of tech facilitated gender based violence, our guest today is the perfect person to explore that further because of her in depth work and experience with women who have been affected by these issues and her role in shaping key solutions. Vaneeza Jawad is an anthropologist and essayist trained at the London School of Economics. After reading modern South Asian studies at the University of Oxford, she joined the Digital Rights Foundation as a communications and engagement manager, where she works on advocacy on digital rights and security. And Vaneeza, I'm so excited to be talking to you about this today.
Me too. It's really lovely to be here.
So, Vaneeza, let's get right into it. The work that you're doing is so important and oftentimes can be so intense. I know that there's so much going on at DRF and with your own work as well. So, tell our listeners what gets you out of bed in the morning.
Honestly, besides work, these days, the promise of a really good cup of coffee is what is keeping me going. Unfortunately, that promise is yet to be fulfilled, but it does get me out of bed.
Coffee is the best motivator. I look forward to my coffee every single day. I think
And it's hard to work in this space without being caffeinated, honestly.
Oh, 100%. There's times where you just need that extra shot of caffeine to really, get you where you need to be. But, we're also seeing like with coffee, let's be honest, one of the other things that is crucial to our everyday lives is also our phones. We wake up, most of us will open our phones or social media first thing in the morning. We're
Absolutely.
immediately connected to the digital realm. It's becoming more and more common in our everyday lives. But what are the dangers or concerns that some people can miss out on?
So I think one really important thing for me as somebody who's also kind of practically grown up online is that we tend to think of the online world in sort of like a neutral vacuum, but it actually is a mirror. So all of the inequalities that we see in the real world, in terms of class, in terms of gender, they don't necessarily disappear, but it's almost as if they're amplified. And there's also an interesting psychological side to it, where with this constant exposure and you're being like exposed to so many people curating themselves and their identities, as women, you kind of start to self-curate to maintain your own safety instead of like for actual self-expression. So the danger online almost these days isn't just, cases of cyber harassment, which are also just so, they're everywhere, but it's also just you stop expressing yourself in the way that you want to. And it's almost as if like there's an erosion of your own digital identity and your own autonomy online. And then I guess another really big thing is we tend to not realize how much we're giving away online, in terms especially of our digital footprint. So one really big cardinal rule for me is never post where you are in real time. Keep those location tags off. Like you kind of don't realize how much you're giving away every time you post without even meaning to, because it's just such an integral part of our lives now.
Yeah, I think it's so important what you mentioned about, what we're sharing online and the kind of story that we're building. And you're in communications, which really makes you a storyteller as well. What's the most important part of this storytelling that you think that people need to be careful about, but also regarding your own work when it comes to establishing a clear message?
So whenever you're telling a story or you're working in comms specifically, I think the most important thing is always framing. Because when you're telling a story, it's important how you tell it. It's not just about what you're saying, but also how you're saying it. So a couple of months ago, we launched this campaign against online grooming, which of course is a phenomenon where young children are just kind of being groomed by adults online, pretending to be other children over social media platforms. And they build trust with these children, and then they kind of just, sextort them. They make these adolescents do things that they don't want. And obviously, as a child, you're scared, you don't tell anybody. And oftentimes, when you do tell somebody, when you tell a trusted adult, the first thing is there's a finger pointed at you, being like, why did you respond in the first place? So, when we launched that campaign, we were very careful to shift the blame. It's not about the child that responded to the adult's message. Rather, it's why is that adult trying to get in contact with the child in the first place? So it's really important for us to kind of shift the narrative in that way. And the second thing that's really, really important is accessibility, right? Because you need to make sure that whatever you're saying, other people are able to understand you. Because it's more about how you make the other person feel before you understand what you're making them think. Because the way that they feel is eventually going to lead them to change their mind about something. And you need to be able to kind of strike an emotional chord and at the same time, lead people into the right direction. But it's not just about information dumping. It's more about kind of holding their hand through a story and letting them feel their way through it, especially in this space. Because empathy is really, really important. And you can't just cultivate that with a long article. You need to be able to make people feel things.
Yeah, 100%. I think you've put that so beautifully and really hit the nail on the head. You need to be able to make people connect to what you're talking about. And empathy is such an important word here, because a lot of times people in advocacy will have so much empathy for the people that they're working for. And yet, oftentimes, it's almost as if that empathy is very hard to come by for yourself. So when you're navigating these topics like gender-based violence online, there's so much hate directed at women. How are you keeping yourself safe and protecting your own well-being while still doing justice to the topic?
So I think one thing we're really lucky with at the Digital Rights Foundation is that we have such a strong community of really strong, passionate women that are working together on this. So it's almost as if we're kind of able to better tune out the noise than most people are. And this also means that the emotional weight of like doing all the work doesn't just fall on one person, because these are issues that we're dealing with every day as a collective. And also, interestingly, we've noticed that even the hate like directed at us or like at our campaigns, it really does vary from platform to platform. So you would think that, it would be kind of uniformly distributed, but some social media platforms in my line of work tend to be more conservative than others, which also is a bit of a refreshing development, because I feel like if you were to post something like this, any of our advocacy campaigns, for example, against TFGBV or even speak about TFGBV 10 years ago, people wouldn't really take you seriously. But now that it's so pervasive, it's hard for people to miss it, and it's hard for them to mischaracterize it. But in the case that it does get really bad, which it does sometimes, I'm a huge fan of just logging off. Like sometimes you just need a social media cleanse, and I'm not above it. I've done it many times, and it really actually does help. Sometimes you just need to log off.
Yeah, I'm all for social media cleanses. I'm the kind of person who will randomly just delete everything and people will find out 2 days later when I start
Exactly.
replying. So I am fully supporting that. But tell me a little bit more about these differences in the platforms and what are some of the ways in which you've experienced that hate? If you could share some examples for our listeners and also some tips of how you've navigated specific situations.
Oh, so wondering if I should name any names, but based on the demographics of the platforms, there tends to be a difference in responses. So usually platforms that older people might tend to use, platforms that more conservative people tend to use, we would get backlash there in the form of comments, in the form of like reposts with quotes, like it would just be kind of disparaging us, really. But then platforms that younger people tend to use, people that are more online, people that understand the nuances of digital violence, because I suppose they've experienced that themselves in some way, shape, or form, they tend to understand. And on those platforms, we generally do well. So like Instagram, for example, is one of them. where because so many people use the platform, and I suppose also because it's like an image-based platform, many people tend to understand what we're talking about when we're advocating against digital violence, because everybody's received a DM that they don't want to receive. Everybody's kind of been put in a position mostly where they don't want to be in. So we tend to get better responses on there. And the way that we deal with it, honestly, I mean, we have to tune it out, because when you're doing work like this, there's some things that you just can't take personally. And you also know on some level that there are going to be people that aren't going to like the work you're doing because they just genuinely don't believe it's an issue. But that comes from their own lived experiences. And we're not, we're not working for that like 1 or 2% that hasn't faced that. We're working for the vast majority that has. And that is something that really keeps us going.
And I think that's another misconception, right? That the vast majority has not faced this. For the 1 or 2 privileged percent who will, continue to live in their bubble, the idea is that this is an issue that very small amount of people face, and we're making quite a ruckus about it. But it is very much the opposite.
Yeah.
So in that case, since, we're talking about the fact that I think most women and minorities and vulnerable groups have faced some sort of hate online, and that hate and that sort of violence online is getting more and more complex with the rise of AI and all these new technologies.
Yes.
What are some tips that you have for women to safely navigate digital spaces?
So I think my biggest step for sure would be to really document and report harassment. So I feel like as women, when we receive a DM, we don't want somebody's harassing us online, stalking us online. We obviously tend to have a reaction of, intense fear. We get overwhelmed and we just delete, we block, we get rid of all of the evidence, because obviously you don't want to be in that experience all the time. My biggest thing with that is it's really important to document all of that harassment and then also reach out for help. So at the DRF helpline, we deal with cases of cyber harassment and cyber stalking quite regularly. And those are still the biggest cases that we do take on, despite the fact that we have, expanded to taking on cases of financial fraud, etc. as well. So like in the month of October, just in the month of October, we received 282 complaints, out of which 253 complaints were around cyber harassment. And it's really important for women to document that whenever they get it and then actually reach out to somebody for help. So our helpline can be reached at 0800 39393, and we have very dedicated helpline associates that will talk you through the entire process, escalate your case if you want it to be escalated legally, and we provide all of those services to make sure that survivors of digital violence are heard and protected.
And in terms of, looking at Pakistan specifically, the work that DRF is doing, one of the reasons that, you guys are able to help so many people is because you're taking into account the cultural nuances over here, because you're based here, you're aware of what's happening. This is very much not, an outside organization coming and sort of imposing their solutions on us. But at the same time, how do you better understand the way in which our society and culture makes these issues specific to us, and then how do we navigate those specific solutions?
In every culture, and especially in Pakistan, in the way that you can see, the internet is it's a mirror of our society. And since our society is deeply patriarchal, that is exactly what you will find online. And in terms of issues that women face online with TFGBV, such as NCII, which is non-consensual intimate image-based abuse, that means something very different in our culture than it would in another culture. So for example, for us, if somebody was creating a deep fake of a girl with just her arm around a man, that would have very different consequences for somebody living in this region versus anywhere else. And these are definitions that we're also working to expand globally. And this is why we feel that regional work on this is so important, and advocacy from Pakistan that DRF is leading right now is so important because we need to expand these definitions um, to make sure that global solutions around this also take into account our cultural nuances.
Yeah, I mean, I did an article about 2 years ago for Logically, and I was looking at the way in which algorithmic bias, but also the bias in these policies and legalities that digital platforms have actually put vulnerable communities in different cultures at risk. Because, like you said, they simply don't account for the fact that something that can be normal for them
Exactly.
can be very
Exactly.
for us. And I think that puts a lot of people in a lot of confusion because there's just not enough educational content or spaces, beyond maybe DRF or one or two other organizations, if, for example, if they don't know about it, where they can get that sort of cultural.
Yeah. Yeah, that is very true. And it's very it's a privilege for us, and it's also a big responsibility for us to be in contact with and working so closely with other international organizations and platforms, especially on platform accountability, so that we can make sure that, again, our cultural nuances are taken into account. So, all of our work with these other organizations, with these other platforms, again, specifically on platform accountability, is so important because at DRF, we really believe in shifting the narrative from, just like women have to protect themselves online to how can we actually dismantle the systems that put women at risk in the first place. That is the solution. Not the solution isn't, like asking your daughter or your sister or your friend to just like not be on Instagram or to just not be online and shrink herself. That's not the solution. The solution is actually looking into how can we remake the system? How can we fix it?
I think that's such a powerful point because we always tend to shift the blame or the responsibility of action on the victims, right? On vulnerable groups who are already going through so much. And on that note, my final question, just to leave our listeners with something to think about and something to get involved with, is for anyone who does want to get involved in those kinds of solutions or wants to get involved in advocacy in this space in the right way, what are the first steps that they should be taking?
I think it's really important to start to have difficult conversations around this in your own circles at a smaller level, because that is really where change begins from. It's important to, when somebody comes to you, a friend comes to you, somebody younger than you comes to you with a concern, you meet them with empathy, which is, again, something that we really like underlined in our campaign against grooming as well. You need to shift your own mindset and the mindset of the people closest to you to make sure that we have social upheaval as a whole. And beyond that, I think it's really important to also flag resources wherever you can, such as our helpline. We've been operating since 2016, and we've taken on thousands of cases, and we've helped thousands of women navigate these challenges. And I think that this kind of change starts small, and DRF also started small, and now we are working at a global level to protect women in the region. So it is a process, but it is definitely a process that begins at home.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing all of this, Vaneeza. I think this is a great note to leave our listeners with something to think about. So thank you for being on our podcast today and for sharing. And for all our listeners, thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you very soon with a new episode.